Hello again. Okay, so we're going to continue. I've always had alternative perspectives, alternative economics. When I was in school studying the credit crunch of 2008, 2009, well, I started studying it after 2008, 2009, and I found all the reasons for why it happened. Started understanding the nature of money through Keynesian models, monetary theory, and looked up. I was looking for answers though. So I had I found out why everything was the way it was, but I did not find solutions or a different path to avoid it or create a different opportunity or different, like, what would help avoid or not, or avoid a credit crunch in the future, basically. And I only found, I even thought I could get answers out of UBC professors of economics later, but my hopes were dashed as well. I found it instead in the dark parts of the internet, where Bitcoin was talked about, Austrian economics. And I do fundamentally believe that, while it does not represent the economics of the world in general today, it better captures the nature of our markets and capital over a longer period of time, over the history of humanity. E- and I also want to acknowledge the duality of, like, the Keynesian monetary theory and the fiat system that we have is kind of like a it's really just everything in this world is like a cycle in some ways. Like, trends come and go. Same thing with economics, it kind of goes back and forth. And many empires and nations before have printed money and created debt, and you know everything waxes and wanes over, like, the centuries and generations. And the same thing, actually, I believe, is happening with tariffs and how an American protectionism versus globalism. And there's many narratives and agendas and perspectives, but and mine is just another one. And the way I see it, though, is from the aspect of liquidity, the availability of capital, the concentration of capital. And it's a key driver of economic growth. And you can actually observe this very plainly in crypto um, and like crypto ecosystems or network states. When money is not reinvested within an ecosystem, that network chain or whatever starts to die. See, the more money changes hands without the supply of money increasing, you get to see healthy inflation and an increase in purchasing power and the ability to draw in even more capital. From a purely rational efficiency mindset, tariffs make no sense. Like, capital is, it moves to underdeveloped areas to generate more returns. If it's if you don't have tariffs, capital flows freely, and it's like, okay, we've kind of built up the returns in this region. We're going to move to somewhere else. It flows from high to low and generates more returns that way. That's the nature of capital. Like, China modernized greatly in recent history with the support of foreign direct investments, as do all nations. And then the reverse, for example, like happens in the US, where you can see the Rust Belt, where at one point there was like a huge industry that has now since waned. And boom towns and ghost towns continue to highlight this fact. Um, in fact, you'll notice that once resource rich countries stop investing abroad and reinvest in local projects, they kind of start to prosper on a local basis. This happens a lot in the Gulf. They have started prioritizing in reinvestments, investments within their regions for prestige and whatnot, and they yielded um, much better long-term results for themselves. And in the same way, um, like Iran, Russia, and North Korea, despite all the sanctions and isolations that they face, they continue to endure because at the end of the day, their money can't go anywhere, so they just have to reinvest it in themselves. And sure, you're not gonna have, like, a great life because 'cause you're not gonna have an efficient life, and you're not gonna get the best of everything, but you're gonna make ends meet, and you're actually gonna be just fine. You can take that to further extremes, where but I don't wanna get into, like, the whole capital versus communism kinda thing. Let's focus back on, like, tariffs. So tariffs aid in concentrating capital in places that you want it to be at the expense of global efficiency gains. So historically, it's just part of the natural waxing and waning of economic interests and powers. The British Empire, for example, concentrated all its capital after the World Wars and let go of holding and developing its possessions further. And capital in general concentrated after that in the USA, and it developed the USA, and it got to a point where it was over concentrated, and the US had so much wealth that it wanted to spend and use that to acquire cheap resources to just keep building more. And today, now, it's no longer the case, and it's no longer favorable. Globalism is no longer favorable to the USA. So she must bring that precious capital back, and that's what she's doing. Yes, it's like Trump in the office, you can blame him and stuff. That's fine. Doesn't really, but my perspective is that it doesn't really matter where you are on the political spectrum. Like, Trump will be replaced. There will be another president. The USA does not let people be more than 8 years. And yes, there's fears of Trump staying longer. Whatever it ends up, though, like even if it goes straight back to the Democrats, I do believe that um, the tariffs are here to stay. Like Democrats are not just gonna wipe off the tariffs. And well, they could, but like I really don't believe that's what the US needs. The US does need the tariffs in some way. And historically speaking, it's prospered, right? With protectionist policies. USA has prospered with protectionist policies before the world wars, and then opened up free trade to grow the market further for all their products. And then they overextended themselves, which resulted in like the Bretton Woods Agreement, and this depegged the dollar gradually and then all at once in 1973. Um, but free trade, globalism, and reserve currency status allowed the USA to continue to acquire raw materials for raw materials cheaper than anybody else, and together with that, luxuries as well. But as we mentioned, no longer the case, right? Um, and I think it particularly like the proof was in the pudding, particularly when we got to like ultra low and negative rates in the past, like just with COVID and right before then. So when capital changes hands quickly, this is this results in in something called the velocity of money, and this creates this is inflation. It's inflation that's created through more money changing hands. This is actually good for economies, like prices generally increasing because of the ability of people to pay and transact quickly is generally a good thing. Um, and the government comes in to print money as well to create the illusion of that happening, even though it's not happening, to help soften like the boom and bust cycle. But at some point, it has to like at some point it has to it brings diminishing returns. The more you print, the more you try to keep avoiding the bust cycle, the harder it's going to hit. Um, and on a generational horizon, like so, what's happening today in the world is really no surprise when considering all the inputs of history and the actors and the nature of power itself. I don't think it's a surprise that we have tariffs in place. And we will eventually have free trade again, but only after the US is saturated with capital and kind of um, rebuilt in some sense. You could say it's a manufactured it's a manufactured scarcity or issue, but I really I really doubt that. And even if you didn't make the changes to kind of create more protectionist policies, um, it would continue, like the purchasing power of the US dollar and the US economy would naturally continue to decrease. There may be less pain, but it's like I do believe the pain currently experienced in shifting in the market shifting is going to ward off or uh, maintain a longer hegemony or powerful status for the United States. Again, I could be wrong, but just try it on. And just on the ground here, I think what I'm seeing is a lot more. People are obviously shifting their their trade agreements from other places. Like if they were buying steel from Canada before, they're buying it more inside the US now. And that has actually started revitalizing a lot of the Midwest um, America and the logistical supply chains within there. So the the biggest negative impact in some ways will be like port cities of the US that do a lot and depend a lot on trade with external international parties. But the inner USA will actually benefit. It's almost like, I don't know, if you play Civilization, it's like putting a policy card that um, reduces gold in cities and increases it in towns. Anyway, my hypothesis is that it would need no for I feel like I'm starting to lose the track here, but I'll just go through the rest of it. It would need in order for us to have like free trade again and um like worldwide and have an alternative to the US is if there arises something that is a better collateral value than the full faith and promise of the United States of America. And my hypothesis is that it would need to be a technologically advanced and like that currency would need to be technologically advanced and easily integrated into the world banking system, offer extremely low cost of capital and extremely high purchasing power for access to cheaper raw materials. And the symptoms of that would be that returns um, returns would have to be in capital appreciation and reinvestment rather than yield on bonds that we're so used to. Like it really does call for a new paradigm to like to create something different than what the US might be trying to create in the world. And I'm not saying either is good or bad, but just what the general system. So the general symptoms will be we'll start to see like the greatest sign that this is actually happening is if we start to see um, higher valuations on company IPOs in this ecosystem nation or currency or network than is currently available and possible on US public markets. Now, those have taken a big dump, but the money that's being dumped from the US stocks, like being sold off, I don't believe it's moving anywhere else. It's staying within the United States. And that to me signals that it's just reshifting and really long term it's as long as it continues to stay within the US, um, it will continue to benefit its people and you won't have another currency taking over. Now, I am biased to Bitcoin obviously, and I do think this is an opportunity though. So if that cash does not go back into the stock market later to support IPOs in the USA and instead goes into Bitcoin, now that's a huge opportunity. Because I don't believe any other country in the world is actually positioned to take over as a reserve currency in the near future. Um, the only ways it would be able to do so would be at by like investing heavily in accumulating energy reserves and attracting capital at really high rates, or tapping their citizens' savings either via consumption subsidies or heavy taxes, and then almost simultaneously trying to devalue their currency as well. Like, these are methods and approaches that would actually, I think, put forth the possibility of a new reserve currency. But I'm really doubtful about the capacity of any region or nation to pull all of these things off. If anyone has the energy reserves and is not already taxing their population and has the potential to do so, and subsidize consumption while giving high rates in some sense by drawing on like their natural resources, it would actually be Saudi Arabia, which is crazy to me. Because they don't have the population or cultural influence and other items that would uh, give it, give it all the angles of what's possible. But yeah, if they really wanted to, I guess they kind of could. So back to the opportunity for Bitcoin, though. It does require that the money that's not going into stocks does come into Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is unique because it does connect a lot of businesses, a lot of like there's a huge variety in number and types of people around the world that hold Bitcoin, whether it's personally or within their businesses. But it's also, I don't believe Bitcoin itself will be like the reserve currency. There's still one step missing, which is that Bitcoin kind of needs its own, hate to say it, but it kind of needs its own fiat to compete and really participate, like integrate with the banking system and really take over. And this has been floated around as an idea before, like the Bitcoin bond, kind of like the US Treasury bill, but um, more colloquially, actually, it's like the idea of a flat coin. But it's really difficult to kind of push this forward without like a centralized entity, that stands for backing and maintaining and advancing um, that flat coin. Is it possible for this kind of flat coin or Bitcoin bond to naturally emerge, like to become an emergent property of like a decentralized network like Bitcoin? I mean, I think it is, but it's like it's a grassroots effort that either spreads like wildfire as an idea with the technology capable and available to support it, um, that it just suddenly seems to happen overnight, or it just will never happen at all. One other thing that could happen, though, is that as the US is already putting a Bitcoin reserve and all that, don't know how much they're actually committed to it, but instead of adopting Canada as its 51st state, it could adopt the Bitcoin network as its 51st state. Um, which does, however, mean that the only real way to do that, I guess, would be to accept and adopt Bitcoin ethos to a great degrees. And it's a paradox for that to occur because I think just ideologically speaking, Bitcoin is the separation of state and money. But then again, that is what the Federal Reserve is, right? It's a private entity separate from the state. At least technically, that's what's supposed to be. But perhaps the situations or that we are in today is because that separation is not truly there, and Bitcoin might actually be that separation that it needs. Which brings us to this weird singularity, and I've just kind of blabbered a lot, and I don't know if this ever actually kicks off or captures anyone's interests. I've written it down though. I might turn it into like an article. Maybe it will be something, and maybe not. But that's my perspectives on the tariffs and looking at economics from an alternative perspective instead of historically, and seeing things in the norms that we're used to. Because I really do believe we're no longer in that. Like we're just never going to go back to an era of free money the way that we have, with interest rates continuously going down over time. Interest rates are just going to maintain and stay where they are for a much longer time, and even potentially increase. Because like even if you check like 10-year bonds or 10-year, like if you try to do like a 10-year fixed mortgage today, like you can get a variable rate at like you can get a pretty good variable rate from the bank right now, just a few points above central bank rates. But if you do like a 10-year bond, it's actually higher. There's a whole other analysis and economics behind that. Won't get into that today, but we're no longer in a system that we have been used to or our parents and grandparents have been used to over the past little bit. And the sooner we acknowledge that, the more we can actually do something about it. I'll do one more after this to talk about just where I'm at. Thanks.